calling the Thursday, April 14, 2011 meeting of the Cape Cod Commission to order. And the first item of business is the roll call. Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Barnstable, Roy Richardson.
Present.
Bourne, Michael Blanton. I am present. Brewster, Elizabeth Taylor.
Present.
Chatham, Lynn Pleffner.
Here.
Dennis, Richard Roy.
Present.
Eastham, Joy Brookshire. Falmouth, Mario Di Gregorio.
Present.
Harwich, Robert Bradley. Mashpee, Ernest Virgilio. Orleans, Peter Munger.
Present.
Provincetown, Austin Knight. Sandwich, Joanne O'Keefe.
Present.
Truro, Roger Putnam. I'm sorry, Truro, Peter Graham. No offense there.
Here.
Wellesley, Roger Putnam.
I'll vote for both.
Yarmouth, John McCormick Jr.
Here.
County Commissioner, Mary Pat Flynn.
Present.
Minority Representative, John Harris.
Here.
Native American Representative, Mark Hardy. Governor's appointee, Herb Olson. Mr. Chairman, it appears we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. The next thing on the agenda is public comment. Seeing none, we will go on to the Executive Director's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And good afternoon. I just want to let the Commission know that last week on Tuesday, we had an invitation-only meeting in the Marine Biological Labs in Woods Hole that was concerned the development of a potential water technology cluster that works, that really builds off of MBL's relationship with Brown and Cooley's relationship with MIT and some of the work that we've been doing with IBM. So we worked with Bob Curtis at the RTDC to put 60 of these scientists in a room to discuss ongoing efforts at technology in water quality, and wastewater that are happening here on the Cape, which fits into our comprehensive economic development strategy moving forward. So that was a very interesting meeting. You'll be hearing more about that, especially at our economic summit, which will be happening on May 9th and 10th at the Placid Inn. And that's sponsored by the Cape Cod Commission, the County Economic Development Council, the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce, the Cape Cod Tech Collaborative, and IBM. So five sponsors there, and that's a day and a half. So anyone interested in attending that economic summit should contact me. We got some good breakout sessions there. Additionally, we met with the Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Protection and the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs the day before yesterday, on Tuesday of this week, with Senator Wolf, actually at his behest, and we talked about a number of issues, including wastewater and wind and some of the bigger issues that we're involved with there. So that was a good conversation, and I think we might be able to expect a visit from the Commissioner and maybe the Secretary in later May and June, but we're working with Senator Wolf's office to schedule that as we meet. Additionally, the American Planning Association meeting, their annual meeting was in Boston this year. It happened this weekend through Tuesday. And we had several reports from several presentations from staff. Sarah Korjap had a presentation on guidelines, and then Sharon Rooney and Phil Baskin presented on the visual assessments associated with offshore wind. Both of those sessions were well attended, and they did a great job, very professional. And then we have started our Board of Selectmen meetings around the Cape, so we've been to Truro and to Eastham so far, and then on April 19th we'll be in Dennis, and on April 26th in Orleans. So those are the next two scheduled meetings. And I'll let you know, every one of you know when we're going to be in your town, to try to schedule it so we can all be there at the same time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is with the minutes for March 3rd and then March 17th. And somebody would move the approval of the March 3rd meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion or question? All in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions?
Extension, please.
Thank you. They were accepted. Thank you. And now the minutes of March 17th as in your packet. So we move that they be accepted. Second, please.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. They did pass. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is a presentation of the Cape Cod Ocean Management Planning District of Critical Planning Concern, process update and extension request. And staff member Heather McElroy will lead us in this discussion.
Great, thank you. Yes, here to give you a little bit of an update on the Ocean DCPC and also to request your approval of an extension on the time period, which I'll get to in a moment. So, just as a quick review, the DCPC was actually designated by county ordinance last April. It's been a year. And the moratorium will expire on May 5th. That should say 2011. The project that we're engaged in is planning for ocean-based development. The state, as you will recall, issued a ocean management plan in January of last year. And as part of that plan, there's a variety of development that is potential in the district, within state waters generally. The district is examining 3 development types: renewable energy, sand and gravel mining, and cables and pipelines. And this Cape Plan is really an opportunity for us to refine the state's ocean management plan, fine-tune it to Cape interests and needs, incorporate a visual impact assessment, which was not part of the state's planning process, and specifically to define appropriate scale for renewable energy facilities. So, since April of last year, we set up a variety of committees. Commission staff have been busy writing. We issued a draft Cape Cod Ocean Management Plan in January of this year. That went out for public comment. And we've engaged our policy committee in reviewing the recommendations or findings in that plan and in coming up with recommendations. They've had 3 workshops since January, 2 of them in February and 1 of them on April 1st. And the goals of those meetings with the policy committee, who are, again, the policy committee is made up of 1 selectman representative from each of the Cape towns. The goals are to address the wind turbine development potential within Cape Cod's ocean waters. And as you recall, the state's ocean management plan established a cap for the number of wind energy facilities that could be developed within state waters, and they allocated those by regional planning area. Cape Cod was allocated 24, Martha's Vineyard has 17, Nantucket 11, Serped has 10. So, in addition to addressing wind turbine development potential within the district, the policy committee has been looking at identifying sites for renewable energy projects and or identifying areas where they should not go, and coming up with recommendations on siting, the appropriate scale, and allocation of those renewable energy projects. We've been using a variety of tools with the policy committee in those meetings. Probably the most useful of which has been the online map project. We don't really have the ability to show that to you here in all of its nifty, speedy glory, but I'll give you an idea of it. online GIS tool that enables us to look at the planning area to pull up data, most of which we've incorporated from the state's ocean management plan, looking at data that addresses natural resource habitat interests, and also look at human activity areas and any variety of things that might come up during the discussions. All of this enables us to illustrate the marine spatial planning considerations and look at these things together. So again, the allowed activities that the district is looking at are renewable energy, sand and gravel mining, cables and pipelines. The plan examines, and this is what we presented to the policy committee in these workshops and discussed with them, the needs, constraints for each of those issues, the environmental impacts associated with those development types, visual considerations, community benefits, and specifically for renewable energy, the factors that contribute to the definition of appropriate scale. And this is the specific task that we really put to the policy committee to help us define appropriate scale. So what are those factors? Most of these factors came out of the state's ocean management plan, including protection of the public trust and public safety, compatibility with existing activities within the district, some demonstration of community benefit from these projects, consideration of the proximity of projects to the shoreline, the variety of environmental considerations which typically address the protection of our natural resources, and then the factor that we added into this district planning process is visual considerations. So we're looking to the policy committee for some policy direction on each one of these factors. And I'm going to just give you a little taste of some of the information that we used. So again, this is using the mapping tool. We were able to illustrate things like navigation routes, natural resources like core whale habitat, tern habitat, locations where eelgrass beds are present. Existing activities. I guess these are a little hard to read. I apologize. Projector doesn't translate things so well. But what you can see here off of to the west of Monomoy and within Wellfleet Harbor and off the southern coast of Falmouth are high effort and value commercial fishing areas. So those are the kinds of resources, not exclusively, that we were looking at. Distance from shore, this one probably reads even less well, but considerations of some setback from shore based on resources that were present, like mean low water, a set distance from mean low water. We also were discussed with them what defines community benefit, how do we evaluate the visual impacts of a project. And based on those 3 workshops, they came out with a set of draft recommendations, which is what I wanted to review with you this afternoon. So the first thing they really did was come up with what we've characterized as a wind energy prohibited areas map. This is a compilation of a variety of core or significant or important habitats within the district area, and they're itemized here, including right whale, humpback, and fin whale core habitat areas. These areas, again, were defined through the state's ocean management planning process. But we've identified, sort of taken this a step further and saying wind energy should not be sited within right whale core habitat because of the sensitivity of the right whales. Tern core habitats is another area which is incorporated in this map. The high effort and value commercial fishing areas, commercial traffic lanes and commercial fishing traffic lanes, the Cape Cod Ocean Sanctuary, a buffer. In the end, the policy committee thought that a prohibited area should be established that is 2 nautical miles from mean high water. So that's shown on this map as well. And they also made a recommendation to expand the North Atlantic right whale habitat area, that's the NARW, in an area that, I'll just step away from the mic for a second, is better seen in your handout, but it's this light pink band here. That was based on newer information provided by the Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies, actual right whale sightings between 2006 and 2010. These were sightings that, or data that became available subsequent to the state's planning process. So the policy committee thought that it was appropriate to establish that as a significant area. Not necessarily prohibited completely, but significant. So that's sort of a better version of that map. It should be in your handouts as well. They also came up with a number of recommendations that address more specifically each of the factors for the definition of appropriate scale. I've sort of organized these based on their what they most closely address, but you'll see as we go through them that there's a lot of overlap. So here, with regard to public safety, protect marine and air navigation to and from Cape Cod, site wind energy facilities, WEFs, with adequate buffers to existing uses, ensure safe operation and maintenance, and require bonding and procedures for decommissioning. Compatibility with existing uses. Want to make sure that wind energy facilities are not adversely affecting our recreational or commercial fishing areas. And then this next standard or recommendation, which would result in a regulation potentially, to site wind energy facilities no closer than 2 nautical miles from mean high water. Again, the things that they were thinking about were conflicts with existing uses, protecting public safety because that's a zone where there's a lot of recreational activity, and to protect the scenic and recreational qualities of the coastline. Let me just stop there and remind you that the boundaries of the district are coincident with the state's ocean management planning boundaries, except that it's just Cape Cod, Barnstable County, and that land side boundary starts 0.3 nautical miles from mean high water, which is 1,500 feet. So there's actually an area between the shoreline and the beginning of the district where these recommendations or subsequent regulations would not necessarily take effect. There are a number of environmental protection recommendations that would result in regulations to specifically address protecting natural resources, in this case protecting whales, terns, and other highly sensitive species. These are federally or state listed species typically, through the designation of a no-build area. We saw that in the map. Protect whales and sea turtles during construction and decommissioning through time of year, TOI, time of year restrictions, vessel speed restrictions, other best management practices. Protect sea duck habitat. Sea ducks are known to utilize waters less than 20 meters in depth. Didn't make sense to eliminate, incorporate sea duck habitat as a prohibited area. That would have eliminated everything within the district, pretty much. But that's a consideration. Protect birds and bats through restricted operations during migrations and storm events. Apparently there's technology available that can identify when birds or bats are present in quantity and turn off turbines. More on that later, I guess. Protect known fish spawning habitat and eelgrass beds and hard complex bottom, which is high quality fisheries habitat. So quick. and minimize turbidity during construction through best management practices. There were also recommendations to address the definition of community benefit. The committee recommended that projects demonstrate at least 3 community benefits that could be defined as being locally owned, having made some contribution to a community fund that could be used for additional renewable energy development or energy conservation issues or things like that, direct job creation, and demonstration that there's actually energy import substitution. That there's we're not just creating more energy, that we're actually not demanding energy from off Cape Cod. Proximity to the shore, that wind energy facilities should not be sited such that they adversely impact sensitive shoreside landscapes. That gets to the visual considerations piece of things. And appropriateness of technology and scale is one of these factors that's sort of all-encompassing. It brings more of them together. The recommendation here that wind energy facilities should be located outside of the spatial extents basically just reflects the map that they recommended. And then also ensure regulatory review of all wind energy facilities within the planning area. This is a recommendation that might lead to a DRI threshold that would ensure review of any wind turbine. This, I should say here also that the state's ocean management plan states that the Cape Cod Commission and the Martha's Vineyard Commission are given that right to review wind energy facilities. So that's not necessarily a new idea. Public trust is one of the last factors, but we've been advised that that is addressing the public trust is really the purview only of the state legislature and the DEP, so we didn't take it up. There are a couple of additional things to talk about. The regional allocation of turbines. Should turbines be allocated 1 or 2 to a town, or should they only be, since we've been allocated 24 by the state, should they all be located in one location? That's something yet to be discussed. That definitely got a lot of attention from the policy committee in their initial discussion on it. And the local participation in project review, again, this is something to be discussed. Which towns should participate in the review process through a Board of Selectmen vote? Should it be all of the Cape towns? Should it only be the towns who are neighbors to a project, etc.? So that's the overview of the recommendations that came out of the policy committee at their April 1st meeting. They wanted an opportunity to take those back to their boards of selectmen and discuss and be able to revisit them. So we will have an additional meeting in about a month, or less than, early May, to make any revisions as needed, and to discuss those additional issues, take a final vote, we hope, on those recommendations. The recommendations will go to the planning committee for, or really regulations that derived from those recommendations will go to the planning committee for discussion, and ultimately, hopefully, to forward to you all for your consideration. There will be a hearing, and if you vote favorably on those, they will move forward to the Assembly of Delegates, which will also have a hearing and take some action on them. That all needs to happen by May 5th. And it won't. So one of the other actions that the policy committee took was to recommend to you that you vote to extend the DCPC moratorium by the allowed 90-day time period. That would take the DCPC moratorium to August 3rd, and that's the action that we're looking to you to take this afternoon. I guess that's it. Unless you have any questions.
Yes, just a minute. Thank you. Do we have any questions? Elizabeth?
Thank you, Heather. Just looking at the map, I see this one open spot is placed right off Brewster and Orleans. Does the extent of the crosshatch line essentially delineate the end of the low tide mark on the tidal flats? Or how does that, it's too bad you can't put a larger map up there.
How about this one here?
Perfect. So where's the low tide on the tidal flats? Where would that line be?
So, yeah, low tide out here, there is an extensive tidal flats off the coast of Brewster. And low tide comes fairly far out.
So it's about halfway up that?
It's about halfway. If this line here is 2 nautical miles from the shore, I'd say, I believe it's less than a mile out.
Okay, and have you considered the fact that I think there's still fishing weirs located either off Brewster or Orleans or right near the line? I don't know if the Ellises still have weirs, but I thought somebody did.
Weirs this far out?
I'm not sure where they are. I would assume they are just past the low tide line on the flats, but I'm not sure.
So that could be in here. No,
It could be further out, I'm just not sure, but I think there are still fishing weirs that are set up out there.
so, sorry. So that's, good information to add into the mix. I think, again, the map represents areas that the committee felt should be prohibited for wind energy development because there was clearly enough conflicts that it wasn't appropriate to locate them there. I think that's a fair summary of their deliberations. The areas that remain, the areas that we see in light blue within the district boundaries, are areas that could support wind energy development, but it would still have to go through some kind of a review process, provided regulations are adopted through the DCPC process, to ensure that things like weirs that may be present are not adversely impacted. That's the list of recommendations that I went through get to those kinds of considerations.
And I take it they are about to take up their discussion of sand and gravel mining?
I hope so. It's challenging bringing enough of them together on the same date. It's hard to get a quorum at a given time, but yeah, I'm working on that.
Will that somehow be correlated with dredging? Because I was questioned about that at our planning board meeting last night where I presented your information, and that came up. One of our selectmen was there, and he questioned, where does dredging end and where would sand and gravel mining begin, or is there an overlap? And I assume that those light-colored, those blue areas are where you could also do sand and gravel mining?
So this map addresses only
Wind turbines?
wind energy development.
Okay.
Yeah. The sand and gravel mining discussion would ideally result in a different map that addresses the specific impacts associated with sand and gravel mining. There are a couple of resources that are shown here that are not considered to conflict necessarily with sand and gravel mining. So, for example, I doubt you would see a 2-mile buffer around the Cape preventing sand and gravel mining within that area. But that's all yet to be discussed. Sand and gravel mining, you're right, there is overlap there, and I think that that's something that we need to discuss. I mean, sand and gravel mining overlap with dredging. When the district was nominated, I recall there being a discussion about whether the district would actually capture and prevent the moratorium in place during the district planning period would prevent municipalities moving forward with dredging projects. And we examined that, and it was determined that most of that municipal dredging that occurs for navigational purposes, which is the extent of municipal dredging that we're aware of at the present time, happens outside of the district boundaries.
Okay, and I had one last question. Have they already dealt with the cables and pipelines issues? Is that something that would be under local control, or would the state be stepping in because it's a utility issue?
The state definitely, this is something that the state took up in their ocean management plan. And it's an area identified for consideration under our DCPC as well. I think just given time constraints, the considerations we give to the cables and pipelines will be far less comprehensive than they were for wind energy, but I'm hopeful that there could be a map adopted as a component.
Okay, I assume when they talk about the sand and gravel mining and come up with their own map, they will be cordoning off eelgrass beds and shellfish beds, but it may be a much more open map than this one.
I think that is very likely, much more open. And just on the eelgrass question, the state did identify known eelgrass beds and mapped them. They also mapped something they've called hard complex bottom, which could be, you know, anything from shipwrecks to, you know, a rough bottom surface created by ocean currents. But it's an area where the habitat is better just because of the conditions. They mapped those areas as well, but because eelgrass migrates and moves, it's, you know, it's a plant material that grows. Sometimes it grows well in one location, then it may migrate. The policy committee decided that it wasn't appropriate to incorporate with a hard and fast line, but instead to establish a standard that would ensure the protection of any eelgrass beds that were surveyed through a you know, a site survey associated with a proposed project.
So how will, if I may continue, how will they treat historic locations of beds? Because obviously they were a lot more extensive than they are now, and with proper care and hope they may grow back where they originally were because it was good habitat, and if those areas are dredged or dug up, we'll never see them there. So I would hope they might incorporate that.
That's something that I think could be incorporated into the regulations.
Yeah. Oh, I just thought of, excuse me, one more question. At what depth do they usually do sand and gravel mining? Is that controlled by depth, or can it be done from any depth?
It really varies, and it will depend on where the material is that they're after. But there are considerations associated with that. You know, something that's very deep can create an anoxic conditions down at the bottom that just fills in with muck and is good for nothing. It can also change ocean wave action onto the shore. There are a whole range of considerations.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Joanne?
I don't have my glasses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You want us to vote for an extension. I'm sure there aren't any consequences, but can you give us some sort of a, you know, a timeline as, you know, for the allocation of turbines, and I'm sure nothing will be affected, but to vote on this, if I could have a little more information, it would be helpful.
Sure.
Thank you.
We are presently trying to schedule our policy committee for another meeting. They had wanted some time to discuss the things they'd already voted on with their boards of selectmen, so we're looking at early May. We hope that they will be able to finalize their vote and on the recommendations they've just made, and also look at the additional items at that meeting. We may initiate discussion sort of at a preliminary stage with the planning committee, you know, the commission's planning committee, prior to that vote, just to get things going, because there are multiple steps before August 3rd when, if you choose to vote to extend the DCPC timeframe, that's our drop dead date. So does that give you enough time frame? I mean, it's, I guess, roughly speaking, policy committee is finished mid-May. Planning Committee takes it up in May, June, takes it to the Cape Cod Commission June, July, well, by end of June, and then give the Assembly of Delegates approximately a month, July, to have their hearing and vote. Yeah.
Yes. Peter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to let you know that our Board of Selectmen thought that your meetings were very well conducted and very informative, so they give you a vote of confidence for doing a good job.
Good.
One of the things that I would like to ask, and I'm probably the only guy in the room, I have two questions. I probably the only one in the room that doesn't know what TOY restrictions are. And question number 2, the exclusionary North Atlantic right whale areas, and I read your sentence here on the first page, it says where, not strictly prohibited, but where the habitat is presumed significant for the production of the federally endangered North American right whale. Doesn't that pretty well exclude that, prohibit that?
So TOY is time of year restrictions. So that means that with regard to sea turtles, for example, which, for which we have very little actual data where they're present, but we do know when generally they're present. It would prevent construction within significant areas for sea turtles when they're present. But construction could happen in the bay in the winter because sea turtles are not there in the winter, that kind of idea. The exclusionary area is, the committee was initially on a path to identify that expanded area in pink as a prohibited area, just include it in the red areas on this map. And then there was some concern that that was going too far. So they took an intermediary step, which was to define it as exclusionary, essentially setting the presumption that this area is significant based on the data that's been presented about where North Atlantic right whales actually are present. And I can't show that to you here, but if you're at the office sometime, I'm happy to share that with you. They're basically everywhere in the bay and to the north and around to the east. Presume that area is significant, and the burden would be, presumably the burden would be on an applicant, a project applicant, to demonstrate that constructing a project in that area would not adversely impact right whales. The regulatory language to address that hasn't been crafted yet, but the idea is that there's wiggle room in that area, whereas in the prohibited areas, there's not wiggle room.
Thank you.
Yes, Elizabeth.
I'm really earning my keep today. Since there's such a restricted area, at least on the north side of the Cape, and I guess to the east, where wind energy turbines could go, and the state's talking about 24 for the Cape, obviously some towns have no chance to put them out there, and since land turbines are not doing spectacularly well, not that the marine ones are either, is there some possible setup in the future when turbines are considered that all the towns will be able to buy into them somehow as a regional benefit? Because obviously there's no place for Provincetown or, Wellfleet.
That was one of the questions that was of great interest to the policy committee, and that's one of the things that they'd like to take up and discuss.
Or are Orleans and Brewster going to be able to sell bonds all by ourselves for that little space we have?
Yeah, the money aspect of it, I think, is perhaps not something that we're trying to get into. That can be.
But I don't know if Civic is, looking into something like that, or somebody is. But if we're talking about regionalization, there's got to be some way that towns who are not able to do anything in the waters off their shores will be able to share.
That was
The
absolutely
benefits.
a concern of the committee.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yep, no, I want Roger next, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment to Ms. Taylor. The fish weirs were shown up just off the tidal flats. I haven't seen any this year, but they usually do show up once the weather gets warm. Second thing, and more important, the major problem with the degradation of eel beds is dragging. Dragging is an important commercial shellfishing activity. How are you going to reconcile those two issues?
Well, that's a good one. We specifically, I mean, the DCPC was established very clearly to not address anything remotely having to do with fishing. There was concern that...
Well, except that you've already said that areas where there is high commercial activity, you were, in effect, backing away from them. And in effect, how can you do that when that's one of the things that destroys eelgrass beds?
Well, it's a good question. I think what has, based on the state's mapping efforts, there is not significant eelgrass beds that they mapped that conflict with those high effort and value commercial fishing areas. They only established...
You can see the tracks they make in it. Every day, I see them.
In those areas off of Monomoy.
In the areas off Wellfleet, south of Billingsgate.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, it's a question that I think deserves more consideration than just the cursory saying we don't think about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Jack.
First, full disclosure, I'm a member of the Hyannis Yacht Club. And a little preamble to my question. We host annually a regatta of over 200 boats with maybe 1,000 recreational sailors involved. We have also in the past, not too distant past, hosted both national championship regattas, and we had 2 world championship regattas. And we set up sailing circles out there in the Sound. And I just want to say that obviously we're not the only yacht club that probably would be concerned about recreational boating. And there are a lot of individual recreational boaters out there too. I was wondering, when you mentioned recreation, did that include boating?
Absolutely. And I think that, the state, as part of their ocean management planning process, identified areas that were significant for recreational boating and for recreational fishing. And as you can imagine, those areas filled up most of the map. Again, the policy committee felt that it was not appropriate to establish any prohibited areas based on those mapped areas, because it really would have been prohibitive for any kind of wind energy development. But they did make a recommendation to protect recreational boating interests. So again, that would be reflected in a regulation that would examine that concern during a regulatory review process. Does a project come in as a single turbine located in a mile off the shore, well, or in this case, 2 miles off the shore, that's probably not going to have a significant impact on recreational boating or fishing. If you have all 24 located in a specific area where the Fagawi happens, then maybe that is a significant impact. Those are the kinds of things that would have to be considered through a review process.
I have a question in terms of the site where Cape Wind is scheduled to be. How would this presentation impact that area?
Not at all. Cape Wind is located in federal waters, so right here. Mm-hmm. That's located outside of not just our district, but state waters, so outside of the state's planning area as well. The committee did ask for a representation of where Cape Wind will be located so that they could understand the impact of that associated with their other considerations. I think, again, through a regulatory review process, projects would be evaluated about, you know, their potential relationship to Cape Wind, you know. But I think that's the extent, really, of the considerations. I don't know if anyone.
I do know from what I've heard that there has been some concern expressed in terms of any additional wind energy facilities built in that area because of the enormity of what the Cape Wind proposal is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people were asking me, and I didn't know the answer to the question, what kind of protection would there be for that area?
I think, again, that's something that would be taken up through a review process and examined. You know, how does a new project, what are the visual impacts of a new project? How do they compare against existing development? You know, how does the scale of a proposed project impact sensitive shoreside resources? I mean, I think there are a whole bunch of questions that could be examined through the regulatory review process that would get to that question. But and I guess at the present time, that's not literally represented in the recommendations that you see. However, the regulations that might result from those recommendations would ensure that those kinds of considerations are made in a review process.
I think maybe coupled with that should be some sort of consideration given to access to those facilities in terms of what is required in order to maintain them and keep them going. We're going to create a water highway, you know, with a lot of activity back and forth, and not only just the visual impact, but the impact it would have on the quality of life of people who enjoy that area.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Any other comments? Yes, Michael, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Heather, in the assembling of stakeholder representatives from each of the town, all the towns have been approached with regard to the representation in the process. I had an interesting conversation about a week and a half ago with a representative of tribal government on Aquina who said they don't know whether or not we've proactively reached on out to any of the federally recognized tribal entities with regard to this process. Can you comment on that at all?
Yes, there's a representative, I believe, from both the Aquina tribe and the Mashpee tribe on our distribution list. We have not actively contacted everybody in our stakeholder list with a phone call, but through multiple meetings that have happened since we started this process, they've been apprised of what we're doing and given opportunities to participate. So that is definitely an issue that's come up and one of some concern that we haven't heard from them. There are others that we haven't heard from either. So,
if I may just continue quickly, if we could ramp up those efforts to contact them. I know there are members in Aquina that are interested, and I'm sure they'll reach out to their sister tribe over in Mashpee as well. And I think the message that they made clear to me was because of their sovereign status, they may come up late in the game after regulations have been put in place, and then because of their special legal status might potentially cause some disruption to the bylaws and the regulations put in place later in the game when they might have been averted if they were actively participated. If they actively participated in the process earlier in the game,
right.
Maybe the concern is that they need to be more active on their side, is what you seem to be saying.
Good point. Thank you.
Yes, Elizabeth, and you're after Elizabeth, if you don't mind.
Okay, thank you. Once we finish this process, I presume we will be coming up with regulations, and then people will go in front of the commission for permits for these activities? How will this be enforced?
How will which be enforced?
Anything. I mean, are we going to have regulatory control over all of Cape Cod Bay? What does or doesn't happen there?
If a threshold is established that would ensure regulatory review by the commission, then any single wind turbine proposed within the district boundaries would come here for review. And then the idea is that these recommendations that the policy committee has made would result in regulations that would be applied through a DRI review process. The state is having the planners who developed the ocean management plan are having a sort of a follow-up meeting, what's been going on since they finished a year plus ago, next week. And I'll be interested to find out whether there are changes to their regulations considered that would change thresholds, for example, MIPA review thresholds, for example, and or their regulatory standards for the different agencies at the state level.
So then when we end up with regulations on sand and gravel mining, we'll be doing that too, or is minerals management stepping in?
Minerals management is federal.
Hands off, okay.
I guess
Doesn't the state have an arm in that?
Definitely, yeah. There's already fairly significant regulation of any kind of sand and gravel mining. I mean, I think a proponent of sand and gravel mining might say there are some significant regulatory obstacles to sand and gravel mining. And then there are financial obstacles as well. I mean, imagine trying to dig up a bunch of stuff out in the ocean, you know, probably 2 or 3 miles from shore to avoid any shoreside impacts, and then shipping it to wherever you want it. I mean, it's expensive.
Okay, thank you.
Peter, please.
Heather, looking at the map that you've got it here, there's possibly 3 areas where turbines can be clustered. So that's going to make for a fairly dense grouping of turbines. How many do you think you're going to put inside Cape Cod Bay?
Yeah, that question came up recently. I did a very rough estimate. That little area inside off of Brewster and Orleans, Eastham, depending on the spacing, but considering maybe half-mile spacing could accommodate maybe 8 turbines. Half-mile is generous. They can be sited more closely. So you could get 12 or potentially more. I mean, it really depends on the scale of the turbine and various other considerations.
Okay, but all 24 are going to go into those 3 areas, or are you looking something along the south side?
So between those 3 areas, 24 turbines could be accommodated. I don't think you could accommodate 24 turbines off of Sandwich. I think that area is far too small, and I suspect that you couldn't accommodate more than 12 off of Orleans. So then the remainder, or maybe all, would be located in Nantucket Sound potentially. But again, it's also assuming that those areas identified as the expanded North Atlantic right whale habitat areas are not utilized. And it's possible that an argument could be made off of Brewster Orleans that part of that area could be used.
Thank you.
Hi, John, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You said August 3rd. What happens if you don't get finished?
If regulations are not adopted, then the district goes away.
The other thing is you mentioned something and I didn't quite understand it, so you need to explain it to me. You mentioned that at mean high water out to 1,500 feet, it wouldn't apply. What wouldn't apply?
So the district boundaries are runs right along here. So there's that gap between mean high water, the shore, and 1,500 feet out, which is not part of the district. And in areas like Barnstable Harbor and significant portions of Buzzards Bay and Pleasant Bay, Provincetown Harbor, they're not part of the district. So that means that the recommendations that the policy committee made and any regulations that would result would not apply to turbines proposed in those areas.
I still don't understand. Does that mean I can work out some sort of arrangement and put 50 in that little small area?
Yep.
Okay.
It's a crack in the system, huh?
Excuse me. I just would like to piggyback on one of the things that
Did you want to address that?
Jess
would like to just address John's question as well.
Piggyback first. Go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry for the interruption. You asked about what happens if these regulations are not in place by the time of the deadline. I just wanted to assure you that you may recall from the Craigville DCPC that there is a provision in the Cape Cod Commission Act that allows for the commission itself to forward its own implementing regulations if municipal regulations don't come forward. So that is an option if at the end of this timeline we don't have something in hand. Just so you know, district doesn't necessarily go away.
I was going to say something along that line, but the other thing I wanted to, I think it's an observation, and I think it's correct, but if we weren't to take action in a timely manner, and we didn't do what you suggested, the turbines don't go away. In terms, it's a state thing, and somebody else would be making the decision what's going to be happening as far as turbines are concerned in this designated area. Is that true?
That is true, and you may recall that the allocation that's been given to us is up to 24 turbines. It doesn't mandate that it be 24.
That was my next question. In terms of the number 24, it's now up to 24. How can I get 48?
A request can be made to the state. The state intends to revise their ocean management plan every 5 years, and so during that normal review process, a regional planning agency could approach them with a request to increase the number of turbines. I think they also have a means for amending their plan between regular plan updates.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just to fill in some of the blanks on that, the allocation is it's an imperfect process. I think the state recognizes that because we have 24 turbines, but they don't say what size. So we could always go back if we felt the need to, if we had an application, and request more turbines. And I think that was contemplated by some of the other coastal RPAs that also have allocations. But the 24, we were allocated more than anybody else in the state, because the formula takes into account things like population and coastline. We have 2/3 of the Massachusetts coastline. So.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, Mary Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Heather, at what point and by whom would it be determined which area is most suitable for turbines, the bay or the sound?
I think that's something that the policy committee might take up if they had a lot more time. I think we're going to run out of time to have a meaningful discussion on that. So it may fall to a regulatory review process, again, which would incorporate a visual impact assessment. This is something that some of our planning staff have been working on for a long time now. It was one of the items that they presented at APA, and it's a multi-step process which involves assessing the sensitivity of the shoreline, coming up with a shoreline sensitivity map, also a methodology for evaluating the impacts of a particular project. You know, how many turbines, how big, where are they located, the impact of a particular project on a a shoreside area of a particular sensitivity. So that methodology that they're working on, the idea is that it sets out a very sort of established protocol for evaluating the impacts and then having the end result be a measure that would be part of the Commission's review process.
Everybody satisfied? Elizabeth?
One more down here.
All right, excuse me. I'm going to start down this end, if you don't mind.
Go ahead, Roger.
Roger, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things that's come out in the looking at the land-based ones is that the some of the sounds and things that these turbines emit drive away some of the small land creatures from around the bases of turbines. Has any study been done on the impact of this same kind of thing on fishing? Because suddenly if we find that even though it is, but it isn't. So is any work being done to assure that we're not going to be damaging our fisheries?
Yeah, there is a lot of work on the impacts of the vibrations or the sound on fish, particularly in Europe, but some of the species correlate. I think the findings, if I can recall and summarize, are that typically larger mammals like dolphins and, well, mammals, dolphins and whales, are particularly sensitive, and for much longer distances. Fish will have some sensitivity. Some kinds of fish may have some sensitivities, but those sensitivities typically have been only, a very short distance from the base of these things. So if there is an impact, it is not to a great extent beyond the base of a turbine. And then there is evidence that the foundations for turbines actually do create fisheries habitat as well.
Thank you.
Mario, did you have your hand up? No, John again? Good. Okay. Yeah, of course it is.
I still didn't understand your explanation of the area that doesn't impact, because I'm trying to understand that if in fact there's an area that's not affected by this policy that will be implemented, who can actually apply to put things there, and would that come under the jurisdiction of the town that's in the area? It wasn't really clear.
Maybe the easiest place to start is with the fact that our district of critical planning concern was a response to the state's planning process. The state's planning process established, they defined their boundaries as starting 0.3 nautical miles from shore for whatever reasons. We echoed that, or the nomination echoed that, and that was how the district was established for consistency purposes. The state allocated, through their plan, 100 wind turbines within the entire state planning area. And then they divvied those up according to a formula to the regional planning agencies. Cape Cod was allocated 24. So the state is really only concerned with renewable energy development within the district up to that amount, that number of turbines. Their big picture, they're looking at state waters. I think one might surmise that establishing that state boundary, 0.3 nautical miles from shore, was a reflection that 1,500 feet from shore is an area that municipalities are actively engaged in for a variety of reasons. So our district only applies to those areas that are away from 1,500 feet from shore. Outside of that sort of highly active municipal area where there's navigation in and out of harbors, there's moorings, there's dredging, etc. And a municipality could come forward with a proposal to install a turbine off their own shores within that area, and it would not be subject to these regulations, not through this district of critical planning process.
Okay, so the definition is that if it's 300 feet to 1,500 feet, it's in a no-man land, and it's in fact, it's under the jurisdiction of the town that's adjacent to that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, Elizabeth, John, and our friend from Chatham.
Thank you. I presume staff is already working on some basic drafts of regulations to go with everything. And did you say it was going to planning?
Yep.
I would have think it should go to regulatory.
They have planning.
And planning together.
Okay.
Not just planning.
Okay.
Since it's regulations, right?
It is regulations. Yes, I will take that back. Absolutely. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, who was second? Lynn?
Heather, I was wondering, since you're looking for an extension and the beginning of May, several towns will have elections, and it's conceivable that there might be a few Board of Selectmen representatives that will not return. And if that's the case, are you going to extend those individuals the right to stay on, or will there be an immediate boot camp for whoever is the replacement?
Yeah, that thought had occurred to me. I know you're thinking about your town and your representative. The way we've handled some slight changes in representatives on the policy committee to date has been if the town, the selectmen had to appoint a person to begin with. And if they would like to extend that to the representative who's been with us throughout this process, terrific. But my expectation would be they should take it up again and appoint a representative from their elected board. That was our initial request. We would like a representative from the chief elected body.
Thank you. Now, are there any other? Roger, excuse me.
Just a small point. The number that you're talking about, 1,500 feet, actually is 300 rods, and it dates back to the colonial ordinances, and is that area which each town has in which you are permitted to foul, fish, or navigate without restriction of upland owners. Thank you.
Thank you. That's pretty interesting.
That's the information you can cherish.
Okay. Well, this has been, yes, Joanne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to go back, Heather, I had asked the question if there were any consequences to the timeline, some of the allocation, but, you know, as far as you can see, because we are going to vote, there's nothing that adversely would happen because of this vote. It all is positive for you to move forward. Am I correct in that statement?
I believe that's true, and I think that where, you know, there might be some question or concern is if there was a project pending, you know, waiting to file, and they've been held up through the moratorium process. I know that our regulatory staff has met with a couple of cable projects, and their timelines just haven't been ready to move forward. The one that seemed most viable, we talked about this potential extension of time for the DCPC, and it seemed, again, to be consistent with their timelines. We haven't heard anything about any other kind of proposed development.
Is anybody else? I guess everybody's questioned out. Thank you for a very fine presentation. And
Mr. Chairman, I think Heather wants a motion.
You think, who's thinking?
I move that her request. You're being difficult.
I wasn't trying to, moving along to that if you want. But anyway, I wanted to thank the presenter. And then we need to move forward in order to extend
Those aren't my doodles.
You have something you want to say now, Mr. Harris?
I decided that I don't want to say anything.
Give it back. I'll make it.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to grant a 90-day extension to the municipalities to adopt and incorporate implementing regulations for the Ocean Management Planning District of Critical Planning Concern, as is allowed by Section 11F of the Cape Cod Commission Act.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Unanimous vote. You got 90 days. Thank you. All right, the next thing on the agenda is Cape Cod 2011 Regional Transportation Plan. And Glenn Cannon, excuse me, is there something else?
This is regarding this agenda item. Glenn sent his apologies. He had to be at a meeting down in Provincetown and would respectfully request that that item be put over to another meeting.
Okay, well, I think we need to apologize to him for keeping him here so long. Trip. Is everybody agreeable to that? Good. Thank you. All right. Anything, the next thing is other business. No other business? Any Cape Cod Commission comments? Yes, Joanne.
I think that, thank you, Mr. Chairman, I think that Glenn would have advised that in the town of Sandwich, there will be a dual Greg Smith, the planner, and the Cape Cod Commission, a public hearing on bicycle paths for Merchant Square from the marina. So, you know, that keeps moving forward. So for Glenn, I'm mentioning that.
Good,
thank you.
Anything else from anybody? A motion to adjourn the meeting?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions?